Hi, I'm Seamless, and this is my the third part of my contribution to the Learn with Splice series of stuff that's going on the YouTube. The project for this will be available on the Splice website as well, and you can check this out, and you can follow along with the stuff that I've done that I haven't done yet because you're living in the future, as I have mentioned before, because you're a time traveler. How cool is that? You should tell me how you do that. Anyway, this is the video about additive synthesis. And with what we have learned so far with parts 1 and 2, with subtractive and FM, a lot of this stuff should actually seem pretty intuitive. I say. Harmer! One of my favorite plugins ever. Harmer and Citrus are pretty much my main go-to things for most stuff that I do. Serum is a pretty big one as well. Serum is mostly, it's more to do with wavetable stuff, which I won't be talking about in any of these videos, but it still incorporates a lot about everything else we've mentioned, including FM and subtractive stuff, and even a little bit of additive. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, remember how we talked about the difference between a saw wave and a square wave being its harmonic content? Well, Harmer actually focuses a lot on that pretty hard. In fact, the primary timbre mix up here is about the idea between a saw wave and a square wave. But really, what does that mean? And as we look into, exactly what additive synthesis means, we'll find out a lot about what that means. So let's start with that. Subtractive synthesis is all about the idea that you're building a sound out of subtracting harmonics from another sound, much like this filter idea that we mentioned. The idea that we're taking away something from the more complex waveform. Additive synthesis is all about adding together something to create a sound. And specifically, it's about adding sine waves. It's about starting with a sine wave and then adding additional harmonics to the sine wave to build the sound. Now, we've defined a harmonic as being a tone that's above the fundamental that is a multiple of the fundamental, which is to say an octave and then a fifth and then an octave again and then a third and then the fifth again, that kind of thing. And if we keep adding it in with that series idea, like the half again idea, what do we get? Let's find out. Why? We get a saw wave. A square wave in this case. It'd be a saw wave if I actually kept it on the saw wave. Come on. There it is. But also, like I said in the previous videos, the difference between a saw wave and square wave is merely that the square wave has half as many harmonics. It is, however, the same series, the same idea about the divisions and the multiples and the whole concept. Now, Harmer is an example of an additive synthesizer. There are other ones inside FL, like Harmless, for example, and also Morphine. And then outside of that, there's Alchemy, and I think Reason actually recently developed one. I don't remember what they called it, though. And so there are a lot of ideas. But the whole point about an additive... Oh, yeah, and Razor, Native Instruments Razor. The whole point of an additive synthesizer is that we have total control over what the harmonics are doing, the partials. And what I was just doing with the filter, for example. In a regular filter, what it's doing, the way that actual filters work is actually pretty interesting. It has this idea of this concept of minimum phase, where it's doing a lot of funky phase things to attenuate particular frequencies at a particular point, and it's doing this to take away sound as it passes through it. And you might be thinking, well, what is the difference between what that's doing and what this is doing? This is only looking like it's doing it. Really, what this is doing is Harmer is playing all these harmonics. We're looking at the visualizer, and the visualizer is showing us the information that it's sending out to be played. It's not actually something that's happening in post. What we're seeing is that, like, when I hit those notes, it told it to play these things. And then when I have the filter going, it's telling it not to play harmonics at the cutoff or above the cutoff with certain other kind of parameters thrown in there. When I move the cutoff around, it's basically like saying each of these individual harmonics gets turned on and off selectively to create these movements. In fact, you can think of it as each harmonic kind of existing in its own little universe. It doesn't have any idea what any of the other harmonics are doing. It only knows what Harmer is telling that one harmonic to do. And if we look at like that harmonic right there, we can see that this harmonic was on for a second, and then it was off, and then it was on, and then it was off, and it was on again, and then it was off. And that's all the information that was sent to that one harmonic. It's just on, off, on, off, on, off. And then every single harmonic has that exact same instruction set being applied to it, some of them with different times, some of them different levels. And then when all played together, we get this particular behavior. That's the kind of control that additive synthesizers apply to how it works. And in fact, every piece of thing that is part of the actual additive synthesizer of Harmor portion has to do with three primary ideas. It controls the amplitude, like we just saw, the pitch, and the phase of every individual harmonic. And every single thing has something to do with messing around with those particular parameters. The filters work just as I described it, which is to say that it turns on and off selectively particular harmonics depending on what the filter is doing. And because this isn't based on the basic minimum phase idea, this means a lot of things. For one thing, it means that what's happening is actually what's called linear phase, which is really neat, but it's not necessarily applicable in a lot of ideas. I mean, it is, but it doesn't. Don't worry about that. But what it also means is that we can do some stuff that regular filters can't. For example, this ridiculously sharp cut that's happening when I'm moving it around is something that minimum phase filters have a really hard time with, especially when you're moving it quickly. There's other things like the idea of the resonance. In this case, the whole idea of the filter is really being faked with this turning on and off of harmonics, and so is the resonance. The resonance is just saying that as the cutoff moves around, right where the cutoff is, those harmonics get louder for a second based on where the resonance is. And the resonance actually doesn't have to be with the cutoff. It moves around with the cutoff, but it doesn't have to actually be where it is. We can actually change where the resonance is. We can change how wide the resonance is. We can even create a self-oscillation where it puts an entirely separate sound on top of everything that isn't actually harmonic based, which is kind of interesting. Along with that, we can also have a number of different filter shapes that are not necessarily exactly like the basic types. They're still related to the basic types, but they do ridiculous things, and we can even make our own filter shapes. And the entire reason this works is because we are having that kind of control over the individual harmonics. Like, as far as additive synthesis goes, this is really all there is to it. All the things that Harmor does all come around to that concept, including stuff like the phaser. What we're seeing here is sort of a mimicry of what an actual phaser does to something. A phaser is very much a subtractive concept that we were talking about before with the idea of phase cancellation, is that it's utilizing phase cancellation to its benefit to create a new sound. And these darker spots, these lighter spots, represent what the phase cancellation looks like in the spectrum that it creates. And it's just that we have an incredibly much more specific control over it than we would if it were like an actual phaser. And other much more interesting things. We could also see what's happening right now is that this is a shape that's being applied to the volume of the harmonic, but we can actually make it apply itself to the frequency of the harmonic. So it's doing the exact same move and the exact same thing, except that the parameter that's being moved now is no longer the volume, it's the pitch. Now look at that. How ridiculous is that? And while that's a pretty extreme example, this actually lends itself to understand one of the particular strengths of Harmor, and with this idea of that level of harmonic control. Remember what we were talking about the idea of a supersaw. Well, we can still do a supersaw with Harmor. And it actually works still in the exact same way, which is to say that we have 9 voices. bugs. Anyway, it works with the same 9 voices. The idea of the voices is that they is basically creating a copy of the sound that we're playing, and like with the subtractive idea of it, the idea is that it's not necessarily an audio effect. It's what's referred to as a voice effect. Like I said, it has 9 different voices. The goal of a supersaw is that we want to create a lot of high frequency phase cancellation. And remember what we said about what phase cancellation is. Phase cancellation is when we are playing a sound, like a waveform against itself with a different pitch, and that causes the rhythmic phase cancellation. Well, there is actually a limit to how the phase cancellation works, which is to say that if I were to play a sine wave against another sine wave, you can hear the phase cancellation. It's very obvious. And the farther away that the farther away the pitch difference is, the faster it goes. Now, there are a couple notes that you can play, a couple chords that you can play where it'll actually work out where it's not phase canceling anymore. One of them being a fifth, but the first harmonic being an octave. It's a multiple of the fundamental, which means that if I play the octave and itself together, it will not phase cancel. There are, like I said, there's some other different kinds of different series where that'll work as well. But the one that we care about at the moment is this idea of the what's referred to as the Fourier series, which begins with the octave as being the first harmonic. If I play these two together, it does not phase cancel. It doesn't take away from either of the waveforms at all, because the zero crossings match up. And because basically because of the idea of the multiple fundamental. Now, with all that going on with the saw wave, when it's all added together, all the harmonics that are involved in the saw wave together, they're all multiples of the fundamental, and they're all not phase canceling against each other. Or they are phase canceling, but they're phase canceling at a rhythm that's harmonic to everything else. And it's all stuck. It's all very rigid. And the second any of those gets even a little bit out of perfect harmonic pitch, it begins to phase cancel. You can hear it start to do it. This thing over here, this prism knob, this actually just moves the pitch of harmonics. There's a little graph in here that actually allows us to change what the prism shape is. But the important idea being that the second that they got even a little bit out of pitch, the phase canceling begun. It stopped being rigid, and it started to do that kind of wash idea, especially at the higher frequencies. This is important for the idea of a supersaw, because a supersaw is all about that wash. It's all about creating a special and just a unique kind of high frequency phase cancellation that adds to the tone of the sound. Which means that Harmor is actually the perfect engine for this kind of stuff, because we have all the control over the individual harmonics that we do, even with this idea of unison, because in the unison window, we can actually control how much pitch difference in the unison there is per harmonic. That's what this graph is. Which does just wonderful things. This, by the way, is also what I was talking about when I mentioned the squelchy idea and the cascading phase cancellation. Because if I were to do phase cancellation with, like, for example, this shape, this is saying that the fundamental tone has some unison going on. The first harmonic does not, but then every harmonic after that has this slowly increasing amount of unison depth applied to it. And then that happens. Because if it were all together, if we're all the same unison level all together, that means the entirety of the two voices would oscillate evenly. But now if we're doing this, this is saying that the unison amount is not proportional for the pitch of each individual harmonic. But it's set up in such a way that that means that the phase cancellation is triggered faster and faster as it goes higher, and it creates that cascading effect. Which also creates that squelching sound. And that's a lot of fun. That's a lot of cool things going on in there. Let's start putting some of these sounds down. Now, it's about Harmor specifically. Harmor is smart about the way that it's built, because the way that they call it is that they refer to it as an additive subtractive. An additive subtractive synthesizer, which is to say that its core is additive. It's based on additive synthesis, but it is designed in such a way that we are allowed to get subtractive-esque sounds just with an additive edge. So it is as if that we're sort of juicing up a subtractive sort of concept with additive synthesis. And like I said before about the filtering ideas, is that we can actually use this to our advantage because of how ridiculously sharp it is, because it's not a real filter. And this works exactly the same way that we did in Citrus if we wanted to make a filter pluck. I mean, almost literally exactly the same, because they're still designed by the same guy. Turn on ramming and make it extra sharp. Look how sharp that is. So we're basically using subtractive synthesis as the base idea, because like I said before, even when we're using other synthesis types, subtractive synthesis is still everywhere. It's still all over how it works. The phase cancellation is a very big part of subtractive synthesis, and so is the idea of filtering. Even if we're not using it as a real filter, quote unquote, we're not using how actual filters do their job, we're still filtering stuff. We're still doing that. So here's that exact same chord pattern that we had from the subtractive synthesis video. Let's just do a short version. So we're still using the technique that we discovered with the subtractive synthesis idea, but we're still applying it, and we're using it in such a way that actually makes it just a tiny bit more unique. And it's not just from the sharpness or from the filters idea. We can even go further with this. We can do things like change the harmonic hue to pitch window to make a unison profile that is absolutely impossible to do with subtractive-based ideas. Add a little bit of prism in there. When it opened up, we can kind of see get kind of the idea going on there. And this is sort of the power of additive synthesis, is that we can use it to make extremely ridiculous and unique sound design, like with the squelchy unison idea, but we can also use it to just give a big old boost to regular, quote unquote, regular sound design ideas. One of the things that additive synthesis just at large is sort of known for, plucky additive, is its ability to do quote-unquote organic instruments, and especially metallic ones. FM has a little bit of a ability for this as well, but FM does, but additive really takes the cake in its ability to make sort of things like bells, and I'll show you why. So let's make a bell. Now the bell idea begins with just being a sine wave. I'm going to do that in a particular fashion. What I've been doing here is I've been using a keyboard tracked filter with a really sharp width to come down and sort of give us a specific frequency. And it'll be the same frequency for all the notes. That's why I've been doing that. Now I'm going to use a pluck to kind of bring it down. Now, that by itself already sounds kind of bell-ish, right? Put in some reverb and that sort of thing. Now, the quality that separates literally any instrument at all from each other, not just the digital ones, but also the physical ones, is its harmonic behavior. And in metallic instruments, the metallic sound, the idea of metal, is something that comes from this idea of enharmonic sounds, which is to say tones and harmonics that are not in the right pitching. They're not in the right calculated position of being perfectly harmonic. Fortunately, because we're using an additive engine and we have control over each individual harmonic, we can actually force it to be in that kind of position. So here we have a bunch of harmonics that have opened up in the pluck, and we can see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them above total, kind of fundamental. And they're all perfectly harmonic. But if I were to use the prism to screw with that, just the fact that I've changed them suddenly makes it sound much more metallic. That actually sounds pretty good. I have in the past actually made what I consider to be a really good bell. I'm actually just going to open up that preset because I showed you the basic idea of it. But if you work it hard enough, you can really sell it. And that kind of brings me to the last idea that I want to discuss when it comes to additive synthesis. And this is the idea of sort of the every sound. Like I just said, every sound, physical or otherwise, differentiates itself based on its harmonic behavior. And with this idea, we should think to ourselves technically, especially with the idea that we discussed when we're building a saw wave out of sine waves, that if we know the harmonic behavior of a sound, that we should be able to recreate it out of any sound whatsoever out of sine waves. That's the theory. And as it turns out, you are totally correct in that thinking. I'm just gonna put this pattern here so that we can have it in the project. Some bells. Let's make you weird blue. And Harmor has actually just very specific function dedicated to this concept. The idea that if we know about the harmonic position, the harmonic movement, and where it's going, that we can synthetically recreate anything. We absolutely can.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All right.
Let's use that sound again because it's fun.
All right. All right.
And there it is. Now,
All right.
based on what we're seeing here, what it sounds like, what we're seeing over here, you might be tempted to think that I'm just playing back the audio file. But if I zoom in far enough, we can see the truth before our eyes. What we're looking at is an individual, like every one of these little black lines, of which there are many, is a moment in time that samples the spectral position of the piece of audio that we're in there. Because it's no longer playing audio. It's actually playing, it's crossfading between these particular sections of added, like, harmonic movement.
All right.
I can demonstrate this by...
All right. All right.
You may think of this as the trap lead generator. Anyway, this is sort of like the logical conclusion of what it means to use additive synthesis, which is the idea that if you can analyze and look at the spectral behavior of a sound, that if you know enough about how you can manipulate it, you can create it again perfectly no matter what. And it just so happens that Harmor has the capability to do that. Not only that, but you can also mess with it. You thought I was kidding about that trap lead thing, didn't you? I actually, in my YouTube channel, I have an entire playlist that is basically about individually picking up and looking at every single thing that Harmer can do, including a lot about the resynthesis ideas. If you look into the playlist, you'll find it in there. I think it's called Harmer Basics. But what I've touched on here is sort of the cornerstone of what it means to use additive synthesis, and sort of its strengths and how it works, and the science behind it. And this, I think, has demonstrated that quite clearly. And this is why I absolutely love it for just about every kind of thing. There's a lot of stuff that is really you're only really able to do it with FM, and there's also a lot of specific stuff that you can really only do with like wavetable based things, kind of like how Massive works and Serum. But the majority of every kind of sound design can be approximated with an additive engine like this. It's just a lot of fun. It's a lot of cool thing. In fact, a thing like Harmer, pretty much the only thing that it can't do is real manageable FM. There are actually some tricks you can do to do some interesting kinds of FM, but it's not really very wieldy. It's a lot of fun, though. Anyway, this project will be available on Splice. You can look at it, you can look at the examples, look at some of the things I did. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. And as usual, have a nice day.